What if the grand narrative of creation, as we know it, is missing a primordial chapter? We're often taught that Lucifer was God's first enemy, the initial rebel in heaven. But what if that's merely a later act in a far older drama? Imagine an entity or a force that rose in defiance even before creation itself, before light, before the Word, before the heavens and the earth. A presence that resisted from the absolute void. The script, unveiling the primordial resistance. The Bible opens with a seemingly straightforward statement. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Yet, what existed before that beginning? Scripture is remarkably silent on this. We understand God is eternal, and all things began with His Word. But a curious clue emerges from the book of Job. In Job 38 verse 7, God describes creation, noting that the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. This implies that celestial beings, angels, were already present, existing before the world's foundations were even laid. And among these ancient beings, not all remained loyal. Lucifer is the name we associate with the fall, the proud, shining star who rebelled against God. However, whispers in older traditions, hidden within apocryphal texts, rabbinic speculation, and early Christian writings, point to an even deeper and more terrifying fall. This was a being whose rebellion wasn't rooted in pride, but in something far more ancient, jealousy of the Creator Himself. This entity didn't seek to ascend like Lucifer. It sought to undo what God was about to make. It opposed the very idea of creation and acted before light ever came into existence. Imagine this. Before the command, "Let there be light," there was already opposition. Before the stars, before the sun, before Eden, a presence in the void steadfastly refused to accept the will of God. Some early Jewish mystical texts describe this being as Tohu, the force of chaos. Genesis 1 verse 2 states, "The earth was formless and void," but the Hebrew words are Tohu Vabohu, signifying chaotic emptiness. Many mystics believe Tohu wasn't merely a state, but a sentient presence, a being that had to be overcome for creation to even begin. In the earliest layers of Jewish thought, particularly among the mystics, Tohu was more than emptiness. It was active opposition, a force that resisted form, resisted order, and resisted light. It wasn't evil in the moral sense, but its essence was refusal to submit. This refusal, they believed, made it the first enemy of God, long before Satan tempted humanity. This being actively stood in the way of creation itself. God had to subdue it, not through violence, but by speaking light into existence. Let there be light wasn't just a beginning. It was a cosmic declaration of victory. This concept is echoed in the Book of Enoch, which speaks of primordial watchers, beings created before the world who witness God's actions with suspicion. One of them, unnamed, is described as withdrawing from the divine presence, refusing to participate in the creation of order. This wasn't a fall like Lucifer's, driven by pride. This being simply refused to move, to obey, to align. In the profound silence before time, this refusal was deafening. It wasn't rebellion by speech. It was rebellion by absence, by resisting the very motion of creation. This ancient adversary is not explicitly named in the canonical Bible, yet its shadow is subtly present everywhere. In the chaos preceding creation, in the darkness before light, in the primal hesitation before the first command. Some early Christian mystics even believed this being was the true inspiration behind the serpent in Eden, not Satan, but the echo of the one who had resisted first, not out of temptation, but out of a deep resentment toward creation itself. To be forgotten was its punishment, yet its presence still lingers. In certain mystical readings of Genesis, the phrase "and there was evening and morning" is symbolic. Evening, or darkness, always comes first. Light arrives later, as a response. This pattern mirrors the ancient struggle. Darkness moves first, but it does not endure. Creation is not just a beginning. It's a conquest, a divine act that pushes back something older than light. And with this understanding, the untold story begins to make sense. Some early rabbinic sources hinted at this mystery through cryptic phrases. They spoke of a kingdom that was built and destroyed before this world was formed. One midrash even states, God created worlds and destroyed them until He created this one. But why would a perfect God create and then destroy unless something fundamentally opposed him in the process? What if that first creation was infected by a presence that refused harmony and had to be erased? Not a mistake, but a profound confrontation. And that confrontation was with something older than Lucifer. This leads us to one of the most chilling ideas in Jewish mysticism, the concept of Shevarat HaKalim, the shattering of the vessels. According to the Kabbalah, when God's infinite light entered the universe, the vessels created to contain it were too weak and shattered. However, some sages believed the vessels shattered because something actively resisted the light, a presence that rejected divine order, that could not be contained or shaped. This resistance triggered a cosmic fracture long before the fall of angels, long before Eden. This shattering scattered divine sparks throughout reality, and according to these traditions, it explains the existence of brokenness, pain, and even evil. But it also points to a more terrifying truth. The first cause of disorder wasn't humanity or Lucifer, but a being older than both. To be forgotten was its punishment, yet its presence still lingers. In certain mystical readings of Genesis, the phrase "and there was evening and morning" is symbolic. Evening, or darkness, always comes first. Light arrives later as a response. This pattern mirrors the ancient struggle. Darkness moves first, but it does not endure. Creation is not just a beginning. It's a conquest, a divine act that pushes back something older than light. And with this understanding, the untold story begins to make sense. Some early rabbinic sources hinted at this mystery through cryptic phrases. They spoke of a kingdom that was built and destroyed before this world was formed. One midrash even states, God created worlds and destroyed them until he created this one. But why would a perfect God create and then destroy unless something fundamentally opposed him in the process? What if that first creation was infected by a presence that refused harmony and had to be erased? Not a mistake, but a profound confrontation. And that confrontation was with something older than Lucifer. This leads us to one of the most chilling ideas in Jewish mysticism, the concept of Shevarat HaKalim, the shattering of the vessels. According to the Kabbalah, when God's infinite light entered the universe, the vessels created to contain it were too weak and shattered. However, some sages believed the vessels shattered because something actively resisted the light, a presence that rejected divine order, that could not be contained or shaped. This resistance triggered a cosmic fracture long before the fall of angels, long before Eden. This shattering scattered divine sparks throughout reality, and according to these traditions, it explains the existence of brokenness, pain, and even evil. But it also points to a more terrifying truth. The first cause of disorder wasn't humanity or Lucifer, but a being older than both. A will that didn't want to rule. It wanted to prevent everything from ever existing. It didn't fall because of pride. It stood still because of pure, ancient defiance. This being, in many interpretations, wasn't cast down like Satan. It was sealed away, locked behind the veil of creation itself, behind time, behind form. Its name was erased, its influence buried in metaphors and symbols, yet traces of it remain. They appear every moment where chaos touches order, in every dark whisper that questions not just God's goodness, but his very act of creating. Early church fathers frequently debated the nature of evil and its true origin. Some, like Origen, believed the fall didn't start with pride, but with a refusal to love, a turning away from God's beauty, not out of arrogance, but out of sheer rejection. Could this align with the idea of an ancient being who looked at God's plan and simply declared, "No, I want none of this"? A rejection not of power, but of the very existence of life, order, and light, a deeper rebellion, without words, without war, just pure negation. In Revelation, we read of war in heaven, with Michael and his angels battling the dragon. But what if that wasn't the first war? What if there had been a silent war long before, one without swords or armies, a battle of wills in the unseen realms, where one being simply resisted the voice of God? And because that rebellion had no shape, no motion, no name, it was never explicitly recorded. Yet its consequences echo through the cosmos. Some ancient Christian mystics referred to this forgotten force as the shadow before light. Not Satan, not a demon, but a primordial stillness that denied movement, growth, and life itself. It isn't evil in the way we understand demons. It's not seductive, violent, or proud. It is passive, unmoving, cold. And yet, it represents the most dangerous form of rebellion ever conceived. This presence, they suggested, will reappear at the end of days, not as a beast or a dragon, but as a great silence, the final resistance against God's ultimate restoration. Only those with eyes to see will recognize it because it doesn't tempt or deceive. It simply refuses to be. And that refusal is the last enemy that must be overcome. The Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 15 verse 26, "The last enemy to be destroyed is death." But what is death, truly? Not just the end of biological life, but the ultimate separation from God, the complete absence of His presence. Could this death be more than a result of sin? Could it be the lingering effect of that first rejection, a spiritual echo of the being that said no before light, a cosmic force that still resists restoration? In the book of Isaiah, God declares, "I form the light and create darkness." This verse has puzzled readers for centuries. Why would God need to create darkness if it already existed? Unless that darkness wasn't just an absence of light, but a sealed reality, a remnant of the opposition that came before time, not created by God as an invention, but contained by God as an act of mercy. A boundary was drawn, and beyond it, that being was locked away. This idea echoes through other ancient writings. In the book of 2 Ezras, the prophet is shown visions of unseen realms where strange beings dwell in silence, awaiting judgment. One realm is described as void and unmoving, where the breath of life has never touched. Many believe this refers to the deepest abyss, not the hell of punishment, but the forgotten prison of the first resistance. Not a place of fire, but of stillness. Not torment, but eternal distance from the Creator. There are even parallels in the writings of early desert fathers, who spoke of a silence so deep it could crush the soul. They called it the void before Eden. Not hell, not purgatory, but the memory of what God had to pass through to create everything else. And within that void, a watcher, not active, not speaking, but present and hostile by its very nature. It is not named because naming it would give it form, and giving it form would be to invite it back. Many traditions, both Jewish and early Christian, believe that God's act of creation was also an act of containment. That when He said, "Let there be light," He wasn't just bringing beauty into the void. He was drawing a boundary, a line between what should exist and what must remain sealed. This ancient being, older than Lucifer, older than the stars, could not be destroyed, only isolated. Its nature was uncreation. It didn't want to rule. It wanted to return everything to nothing. This is why Genesis opens with chaos. The earth was formless and void. Why mention this at all if God is perfect? Because that chaos was not His. It was what He overcame. A realm that existed in resistance to His voice. A realm where this ancient adversary still lingers. Some believe that the very reason God created time itself was to keep that being locked outside of it. Time, light, creation, they all move forward. But this being cannot move. It stays behind, beyond the veil of Genesis 1 verse 1, in the silence before speech. And yet, from time to time, traces of it bleed through. Moments of intense despair, unnatural stillness, a spiritual coldness that can't be explained. Not demonic, not cursed, just ancient resistance resurfacing. Some prophets have felt it in visions, describing the sensation of being surrounded by a silence that tried to swallow them. Not an angel, not a demon, but something older, something that hated the act of prophecy itself. Because prophecy brings movement, it carries God's voice. And this ancient being despises motion, voice, light, and time, because all of them are reminders that it lost. This is why the Bible speaks so often of remembrance. Not just to remember what God has done, but to remember who we are not returning to. Because forgetting opens the door, not to Satan who tempts, but to the one who stands without desire, waiting for creation to collapse. The enemy who doesn't seduce or lie. It simply waits for the light to flicker. And that's the true danger. Lucifer wanted a throne. Demons want worship, control, influence. But this ancient enemy wants nothing, and it wants everything to return to that same nothingness. No hierarchy, no rebellion, just the undoing of all form. Even in the New Testament, Paul warns that we fight not just flesh and blood, but principalities, powers, and spiritual forces in the heavenly realms. Could one of those forces be this ancient resistance? Still present beyond the veil, still watching, still unmoved, waiting for a generation that will stop speaking God's name, stop seeking the light, and let creation fall silent again. But Scripture promises something else. That in the end, even this last enemy, the one that stands behind death, behind chaos, will be defeated. Not by war, but by the full restoration of light. By the one who was with God in the beginning, who is the Word and is the life. The one presence this ancient enemy cannot withstand, because he was there too, and he never turned away. The Gospel of John begins with a mystery that echoes deeper than most realize. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This is more than poetic language. It's a declaration of divine motion, sound, intention, everything the ancient enemy could not accept. And when the Word became flesh, that same resistance stirred again, not in the open, but in silence. Because once more, creation was advancing. This is why Jesus was constantly met with silence before deliverance. Demons screamed, Pharisees debated, but some encounters were marked by an eerie stillness, as if something older, deeper, refused even to acknowledge him. The man in the tombs who said, "Do not torment me," was that only a demon speaking, or something far older, hiding behind layers of possession? A being not interested in tempting humanity but in watching it wither? And yet, Christ never turned away, because the Word cannot be silenced. Every miracle, every step he took, was a direct assault on the stillness that tried to haunt creation. When he healed, he restored motion. When he spoke, he shattered silence. And when he rose, he declared that even death itself, the last echo of the first enemy, had no power. But that doesn't mean the Ancient One is gone. It still lingers, not as a being we can name, but as a threat we must recognize. In every moment where darkness tries to settle, in every soul that gives up and stops reaching for light, it waits in that stillness. It waits for silence, but it cannot withstand the word spoken with faith. That's why prayer matters more than we think. Not just as a request to God, but as a living sound that pierces the veil. Every word spoken in faith is an act of defiance against the ancient silence. Every cry to heaven, every song of praise, tears through the grip of the one who wants nothing but the return to nothing. This is spiritual warfare at its deepest level. Not against what tempts us, but against what waits for us to stop believing. Even creation itself groans, as Paul wrote in Romans 8, not because of sin alone, but because the very fabric of the world remembers the struggle. It remembers the opposition that tried to stop it from forming. It remembers the stillness that had to be broken. And it longs not just for healing, but for completion, a return not to nothingness, but to a kingdom where everything moves with the breath of God. The book of Revelation ends not just with the defeat of evil, but with a new heaven, a new earth, and a voice that says, "Behold, I make all things new." That is not only restoration, it is closure. The final answer to the first refusal, the declaration that nothing, no silence, no stillness, no resistance, can outlast the will of the Creator. And when that voice speaks again, all shadows will vanish. In the beginning, someone tried to stop creation. Not by war, not by noise, but by standing still. And yet, God created anyway. He spoke light. He formed time. He filled the void. And one day he will speak again. And even that ancient enemy, the first to resist, will be no more. This is the mystery hidden before Genesis. That the greatest threat was not rebellion through pride, but resistance through absence. A will so ancient it refused to move. And a God so sovereign he created anyway. The first enemy was not Lucifer. It was the void that tried to hold God back. And now you understand why the Bible begins with light. Not because God needed to see, but because we needed to know. Something stood in the way, and light broke through it. That moment wasn't just the start of creation. It was a cosmic declaration. I am the beginning, and nothing will stop me. Outro. Embrace the light, shatter the silence. So, when you speak life, when you refuse to give in to despair, silence, or fear, you align with the very act that began everything. You become a vessel of light, a continuation of God's answer to the enemy who wanted everything undone. And in doing so, you help silence the oldest darkness. The first enemy had no name, but the Word, the one who was with God and who is God, has a name that cannot be erased. And when that name is spoken in faith, the silence breaks, the light shines, and creation wins again. If this profound truth stirred something in your spirit, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and activate the bell to stay connected. Your support helps us continue revealing what others chose to hide since before Genesis. And tell us in the comments below, from which city are you watching this revelation? We'd love to know how far this truth is reaching.